An aide, yes. It was in Louisiana where he actually didn't manage even to get a campaign office open. We're talking about Paul Tsongas, just to get the facts right. We said we we're going to talk to Jerry Brown, who's up in Michigan. Before we do, let's check in briefly with ABC's Lynn Scher, who can tell us by looking at the exit polls some of what the voters had to say about former Governor Brown today. Lynn?
Well, Peter, when you look at Massachusetts, which is a state where he did fairly well tonight, Jerry Brown is doing well among those who we keep calling the disaffected voters, those who are not happy with, don't feel connected to what the government is doing. He came in second among those who said environment was an important issue. He came in second in Massachusetts among those who said poverty and homelessness was an important issue. He held his own among those with some college education and among those who said they were angry at the way the federal government is being run. In Rhode Island, where he got an even larger percentage of the vote, he also came in second on those who thought environment, poverty, and taxes were the big issues. But let's take a look at this board. This is an area where Jerry Brown actually won over his two opponents. In Rhode Island, people who said, I voted for the candidate because he cares about people like me, of them, 34% went for Jerry Brown. So this is a group he actually won. Peter?
Okay, Lynn, thanks very much. Governor Brown, former Governor Brown, is at Romulus in southeast Michigan tonight at the United Auto Workers headquarters up there. Governor Brown, thank you for joining us. You can't have the nomination of the party, so what's your mission here?
What do you mean I can't have it? I don't think Bill Clinton or Tsongas can have it. I've got a record. I've been governor of the biggest state. We've created 2.2 million jobs, and I've got the only new political idea in this whole campaign. And that's the flat tax of 13% and wiping out the entire obscene mess of the 4,000 pages of the federal tax code.
That notwithstanding,
now, that's a program.
Sir, that notwithstanding, sir, you know as well as I think anybody, from a straight-out political point of view, you're not going to get the nomination. So what's the mission?
I will tell you that I have a better chance than my two opponents. Both of them are fatally flawed. They don't represent the majority of who the Democratic Party is.
Okay,
I do. That's my background. It's hard to get the message out, but as we do, the crowds are going now from the hundreds to the thousands. It's an uphill battle. I concede that.
I agree.
But we're going to fight it all the way.
I agree. You've had difficulty getting the press, particularly, to pay attention to you. But where is the state you win?
Well, we're right here in Michigan. I think this mission is a good place to start. These people have been ripped off. They've been lied to. Jobs are being exported to Mexico and everywhere else, and these people feel it. I mean, they're angry, and they know that neither Bush nor even the leadership of their own party cares about what's happening to their families and their neighborhoods, their jobs. And I'm here not taking any more than $100, using that famous 800 number and saying, okay, America, we can take it back.
On that point, Governor, you say you've had 1 million phone calls on the 800 number?
No, we've had about 150,000 calls,
and we reached...
well, last week it was $1 million, but now it's gone up to $2 million in pledges. And I hope people watching will call that 800 number.
Well, if you're not
426-1112, okay?
If you're
426-1112, and we can keep this cause going all the way to the convention and beyond.
Well, you seem fairly confident about Michigan. Tell us about Illinois.
Illinois is going to be difficult, but we're going to show the flag there. We're going to be in the debate this week. And I really believe that, well, just take a couple of issues. I'm the only candidate that is fighting the trade agreement with Mexico. Clinton and Tsongas wanted Bush to have the unlimited authority to trade our jobs for this Mexican fast-track operation. People in Michigan are angry about that, and I join in their effort to protect jobs here as our #1 priority.
Governor is one who's lived in Washington most of his life, which is myself. You say that when elected, you ought to challenge the corrupt political system dominated by the Washington elites.
Right.
Okay, fine.
Correct.
Are you going to approach that?
You just said it perfectly.
You're going to approach that, well, those are your words. That's why they're so perfect. Are you going to approach this with drawn sword and chain mail, or how are you going to do it? They've been rooted there for 50 years.
They sure have, and you know what? The decline has accelerated. The Roman Empire didn't go down because they couldn't present a battle in Iraq, which they did. It was the rot. It was the internal decline, and we're seeing this in the loss of jobs and the inequality and the poverty. And how do I deal with that? I deal with it by inviting people to join our cause, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, and ultimately by the millions. I can't do it myself. I'm a flawed vessel like anyone who's been in politics, but I see that this country is facing a crisis in direction. Are we going to be the world policeman with George Bush's New World Order? Are we going to come back to Detroit, Michigan, and put our people to work and heal the division between black and white and make this country what our forebears intended it to be.
Governor Brown.
A country of equality and liberty and life for all of us.
Governor Brown, thank you for taking the time. Governor Brown, who's in Romulus, Michigan tonight. We'll talk to Vice President Dan Quayle and our own correspondents right after this.
This is ABC News' continuing coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries. Here again, David Brinkley and Peter Jennings.
We were doing a mic check a second ago with Vice President Quayle, who's in Washington, who said after us he's going to go home, but he's certainly been doing the rounds.
He's been interviewed I don't know how many times today. He must be tired of it. Mr. Vice President, thank you for coming. I'm pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
Now, I have a little bit of news for you. It's not new, but you may not have heard it. A Republican chairman in Indiana, I don't know which one, was asked why you were successful politically, and he said because in a receiving line he is very attentive to the women and does not pass them by to get to their husbands who write the checks. Had you heard that before?
I've read that quote, and when I was first running for Congress, it was quite helpful, I think. We were successful, at least.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for coming and joining us this evening before you go home to bed. Just before we ask you a couple of questions, perhaps you will listen with us to what people have been telling us in the exit polls about the president's performance today. Let's go again to ABC's Lynn Sher. Lynn?
Oh, Peter, a number of things hurt President Bush in almost every primary state today, mostly a wide-ranging discontent with the administration he's running. According to our exit polls, 7 out of 10 Republican voters are dissatisfied with the way the federal government is working. And a quarter of the Republicans said they weren't just dissatisfied, but angry. Of those Southern Republicans who are angry, 51% voted for Pat Buchanan, 41% for George Bush. The numbers were similar in Massachusetts. Another factor hurting the president, more than 1/3 of Republican voters said his reversal on the tax pledge was an important factor in their vote. And of them, 57% went for Buchanan, only 35% for Bush. As for the president's approval rating, some 36% of Republicans today disapprove of the way he's doing his job. And once again, Pat Buchanan got the vast majority of their votes. Keep in mind, many Democrats also disapprove of the way the president's doing his job. No surprise there. But more importantly, we found even greater anger today among Democrats at the way the federal government is working. And the bipartisan nature of that anger shows how very vulnerable George Bush and other incumbents might be in November. Peter?
Thank you, Lynn. A subject onto which I suspect the Vice President Dan Quayle, would like to jump and talk about Congress. But if I may begin, sir,
Okay.
by suggesting to you a couple of words. Wide-ranging discontent and anger. You've had a great evening this evening, but what's it look like down the road? Doesn't look great for November at the moment, does it?
Peter, this is going to work out. The protest vote that's out there, it's real. I've campaigned all across this country, and people have come up to me and they say, we're with you in November. And I say, well, how about now? And they say, well, we may vote against you to send a message. Hey, we've gotten the message that people are fed up with Washington, they're fed up with high taxes, they're fed up with too much regulation, they're fed up with a bad economy. And George Bush is doing something about it. And you're right, Peter, it is the Democratic Congress that is holding it up.
Another thing that people find interesting, sir, you're the president's point man with the conservative wing of the party, and you're getting badly beaten up by Pat Buchanan. How come you're not doing a better job for the president?
Well, we're doing the best that we possibly can. I don't think that Pat Buchanan has an actual following out there. I think it is a protest vote, and people are protesting Washington. And look at the Democratic Congress, and I know David Brinkley talk a lot about this, and that's this check-kiting, check-bouncing deal. 11,000 checks over a 3-year period of time, or 20,000 checks, excuse me, 20,000 checks over a 3-year period of time, $11 million. What a national disgrace.
I have a question for you. 70% of the people are dissatisfied with the performance of government, not the president, the government. Who in the world are these other 30?
Well,
Can you imagine who they are?
On who support it?
Exactly. Who are they?
Well, they probably live in Washington because the people in Washington probably think that the government's doing a good job since they're all paid by the government.
I know.
Well, a few people, but you know, people are fed up with Washington, David. The government is not functioning, and we don't believe that a bigger government is the answer. Matter of fact, we'd like to shrink the government. We're for deregulation. We're trying to get the government off the people's back. That's going to be a big issue in this campaign. The Democratic presidential candidate, working with the Democratic Congress, will try to increase the size of government. People don't want that.
Vice President Quayle, I hear a number of stories out of the White House and surrounding the White House today that you want the president to be much more aggressive going against Congress in the fall, and you can't get him to be as aggressive as you'd like him to be.
Well, the president's been very aggressive against the Democratic Congress. Every speech that he has made to a political rally and to a non-political rally, he has said, I've got my agenda up there, and I want the Democratic Congress to pass it. And one of the real frustrating aspects of this, Peter, is that the jobs package is pending on Capitol Hill. The president has a jobs package, and my question to the Democratic leadership, what do you have to fear? Why are you afraid to pass the president's jobs package? Are you afraid it's going to help Republicans? Are you afraid it's going to help George Bush? Do you afraid that it might help the American people and therefore help the president? It will help the American people. Pass it. Then, if it doesn't work, we'll take full responsibility.
Vice President Quayle, thank you for joining us this evening in Washington. We're now going to go to Dearborn, Michigan, where Pat Buchanan's campaign manager, Angela Bay Buchanan, is standing by. Good evening, Ms. Buchanan. Big night for Bill Clinton in the South. Won Florida, won a lot of other stuff except for Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It's been a very big night for George Bush. We're going to go to our White House correspondent right now, Britt Hume, who's standing by at the White House. Britt, you've heard all the talk about Pat Buchanan tonight. Does the White House think he's a threat in the long term, and can they do anything to stop him?
Absolutely not, Peter. The White House does not consider him in any way a threat to the nomination, and in fact, the president's spokesman, Mr. Fitzwater, said tonight that for all intents and purposes, we've won the nomination. In no numerical terms is that true, but Buchanan hasn't won anywhere. The fear, Peter, was that once he got started in New Hampshire, that this would build. It looks tonight, at least to the White House, as if Buchanan peaked in the early exit polls from New Hampshire, which showed him way up in the high 40s and within striking distance of the president. He hasn't been able to do well since, and or as well since, and so the rationale here is that the race is over.
That notwithstanding, he did very badly in the ABC News poll yesterday, being beaten by both Tsongas and Clinton. Are they starting to campaign for November already?
That's true, Peter, because they recognize, while these results are not particularly good news for Buchanan, they aren't very good news for the president either, that there is this protest vote that the White House seems to think and seems to say is available to anybody, anywhere, including uncommitted slates of delegates. So they know that the feeling here is that the president has real trouble unless and until the economy turns around, and unless the economy turns around enough so that by November the president is looking at an electorate that thinks that things are getting better and not worse.
They still hope to push him out entirely?
Well, they don't. There's a peculiar sense here that of unawareness of what it is that Buchanan actually wants now. They'd love to push him out entirely and have a unified convention and a unified party in the fall, but there's no clear sense of what they could offer him, what he wants to hear, what he would like done that would have that effect. And so until that begins to develop, they really don't know what to do.
I think one person who believes he knows what Pat Buchanan wants, and that's ABC's Jeff Greenfield, who is standing by now in our Washington bureau. Jeff, you and I were talking a little earlier today about Buchanan's long-term strategy, particularly his California strategy. Talk about it.
Well, California is a state right now where there's a civil war.
President with bad news, because he didn't want it, just didn't want it. And he was cantankerous enough, cranky enough to get away with it. And he did that.
And look what's happened to him.
Right. Where is he now?
He's gone into television.
He's going to be a television blabber like the rest of us.
I'd like to go around a little bit, starting back with Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, I have one media question for you. How dirty a campaign do you think it is so far? Dirtier, more or less than 4 years ago?
No, every 4 years, those of us with nothing better to do for a living say it's the dirtiest campaign ever. I think it's been a basically civil campaign. It's gotten a little testy between Clinton and Tsongas, because that's what happens when you're on airplanes 20 hours a day. But I think if you just look back to the campaigns of, say, 1800, 1804, 1888, Andrew Jackson being called a bigamist and a murderer, it's pretty much, you know, Marquis of Queensberry so far.
Okay, now we've Cokie Roberts still with us, who is at Clinton's headquarters in Chicago tonight. And Cokie, if I could start with a little conventional wisdom and go around, starting with you. Who's been the most improved candidate so far, and who looks to have all the chips, or most of the chips, with him next week in Illinois and Michigan?
I think Clinton is the person who has most of the chips with him next week. He does have the organization. He has tremendous momentum coming out of here, and he will get probably a good many members of Congress on Friday. So I think that this is Tsongas' last really big-ditch effort, and he is likely to get nasty, that being the case.
Jim Wooten in Lowell, Massachusetts. Most improved candidate so far?
I'd have to go along with Cokie, but it strikes me that Governor Brown has really improved his technique for getting his 800 number on frequently.
Okay.
He got it on twice here.
Hal Bruno, our political director in New York, most improved candidate?
Oh, I'd have to say Bill Clinton. He went through some very tough times, and he bounced back. And He's been the strongest campaigner.
And finally to Jeff Greenfield. Any, you going to depart from the crowd as you so often do?
Well, Jerry Brown is the most improved, but every time I call that 800 number, I wind up with paintings of Elvis Presley on velvet, so he may need to work on that phone message a little bit.
All right, Jeff, we'll look forward to some of these additional pearls at 11:30 this evening when we're going to come back and talk a little more about this, but particularly in the 11:30 half hour where Nightline is usually seen. That's 11:30 Eastern after your late local news in most parts of the country. We're going to try to push it out a bit to Illinois and Michigan and beyond and talk to our colleagues again. A couple more results in the Missouri caucuses tonight. It was Clinton by a landslide, and in the Delaware caucuses, Tsongas wins, and uncommitted comes in second. The party leaders in Delaware had suggested that the delegates stay uncommitted there, so uncommitted doesn't necessarily go above Bill Clinton after Tsongas there. But as we've said numerous times now, very good night for Bill Clinton, very good night for the president. Not as good as it's been in the past for Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan buries David Duke everywhere except in Mississippi. And we're glad you've been with us for the last hour. David, enjoyed your company again.
Thank you. Enjoyed being here.
See you in about half an hour. Have a good evening, everybody. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters in New York.
This has been an ABC News special. If you wish to receive a transcript, please send $6 to the 92 Votes Super Tuesday, Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203. The Super Tuesday primaries, part of ABC News' continuing coverage of the 92 Vote.